Hey guys, and welcome to tonight's episode of Sasquatch Odyssey. As always, I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to be with us for the show. And I want to start the show as I always do and invite you. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, please shoot me an email. You can get me at brian@sasquatchodyssey.net. We got a great guest coming up. We got Wayne coming out from California with some really cool experiences he's going to share with us. But before we get started with the show tonight, I just want to take a couple of minutes and get on my soapbox just a bit and address a few things that, well, frankly, have sort of pissed me off lately. I'm not going to lie. Let me say this about people on Facebook. I post in these groups, and if you have something intellectually honest to say, I will engage you all day long. I have no problems. I can hold my own in a conversation. I can hold my own in a debate. You may be right. I may be wrong. And if I'm wrong, I'll be the first to admit it. But let me talk to some of these people out there that like to post comments. In particular, let's use Dr. Jeff Meldrum's episode that just recently aired on the show. Dr. Meldrum took time out of his schedule to come on my show to talk to you guys. I didn't pay him. He came on his own volition, gave me over an hour of his time, and sat down and talked to me about his decades of experience as a researcher, looking at evidence, not necessarily trying to prove. He said it on the episode. He's not trying to prove or convince anybody of anything, right? He is a scientist who looks at evidence and then gives his theory or his hypothesis about what that evidence shows, okay? So let's have some intellectual honesty about these conversations. If you don't like what Dr. Meldrum has to say, fine. Let's disagree about it. Let's have a conversation about it. I respect Dr. Meldrum immensely. I don't agree with everything he has to say. To all the people who came on and said Dr. Meldrum is a joke, he knows more about Sasquatch than he's putting out there, and his religion keeps him from saying it and having a scientific approach to this subject because of his religion. I'm not even going to ask for the evidence for that because it's impossible for it to exist, right? You have made up your mind. That's your working hypothesis about Dr. Jeff Meldrum. You're entitled to that. You should just probably keep that to yourself, okay? To the people who are upset that Dr. Meldrum doesn't talk about and address the fact that he knows that Bigfoot can cloak and disappear into other dimensions. Newsflash, you have zero evidence, again, to support that statement. Your scientific hypothesis, if you will. Dr. Meldrum takes evidence, physical evidence that is allegedly left behind by Sasquatch. He applies his knowledge, training, and experience as a PhD physical anthropologist, and he takes a look at that evidence. He applies his knowledge, training, and experience to say, I believe that an upright, bipedal, non-human primate made this track. That's evidence. That's facts. It's not circumstantial. It's not anecdotal. It is fact. I have a cast in my hand, or I'm looking at a physical footprint, and I've made the cast myself. And based on my knowledge, training, and experience as a physical anthropologist, this is what I believe about that track. This is what I believe about that cast that I'm holding in my hands. You may believe that Bigfoot can cloak. You may be right. You believe that Bigfoot can disappear into another dimension. You may be right. But don't tell me that Dr. Jeff Meldrum doesn't talk about it, even though he believes it's true or knows it to be fact. That's bullshit. Where's your evidence? Where is your evidence, number one, that Bigfoot can cloak? Where's the evidence that they can disappear and they're interdimensional? For me to take to Dr. Jeff Meldrum and say, here, doc, take a look at this evidence, and now please form a hypothesis and give me your opinion on whether or not Bigfoot can cloak or disappear. You can't prove something by using a negative, folks. You can't use smoke and mirrors to prove what you believe about Bigfoot, because frankly, nobody knows. Dr. Meldrum and people like Dr. Meldrum and Dr. John Bennernagel and Dr. Krantz, they put their careers on the line to pursue something that all of us, most of us listening to this show, certainly me talking to you now, I believe they exist. Dr. Meldrum believes that Sasquatch exists. He said on my show, I said, what about the Patterson-Gimlin film? Doc, do you believe that it's stood the test of time? He said, absolutely. Absolutely, I believe it. He said, I believe it as much as I possibly can without actually having stood on that sandbar with Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin and saw it myself. How much more irrefutable can you get, folks? You have a PhD level physical anthropologist who's well known in this community standing up and saying that Patty in the Patterson-Gimlin film is a real live Sasquatch because there's evidence to prove it. He has the video. He has the footprints. He has the casts that were made that day. He has all of those things, the kinetics of movement, all the things that he scientifically explained to me way beyond my pay grade on my show. Now, does he know if Patty can cloak or Patty can disappear? If she had disappeared out of the frame in front of everybody's eyes, then he might have had some evidence to examine. But just because you believe it doesn't mean that he has to be held to that standard. If there's not evidence to take a look at, he can't form a hypothesis, and he's not going to come on any shows, or he's not going to come out in public as a scientist and start espousing on and spouting off what he may believe in his private life. There's no telling what Dr. Meldrum may believe about Sasquatch, but as a scientist, he can't come out and say, I believe that Sasquatch rides unicorns interdimensionally. He'd be laughed out of the community. He'd probably lose his job. So to all of you people out there who believe the things that you believe, you may be right. But don't try to tear somebody else down just to build up your ideas. Let's have some real, intellectually honest conversations about some of this stuff. I am perfectly willing to do that with you. But let's do it in the proper way. Can we do that? Enough of that. You guys came here for the Sasquatch encounters. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to get over to Wayne. That's going to be a tough act to follow for poor Wayne, but let's just go ahead and jump into it. Thanks for coming on the show tonight, man.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. So I know you've had a couple of encounters with Sasquatch and some experiences you're going to talk to us about tonight. So tell us where you were, what you were doing, and what happened out there, man.
You bet. So my first encounter was with my family. As a child, we lived in the South Bay area, so we'd spend a lot of time or all of our free time over in the Sierras going to different places. And one of the trips we took one time was to go over Tioga Pass. And Tioga Pass is a super high mountain pass. It used to be the highest place in the continental United States that you could drive to on pavement. So it was a little over 10,000 feet. Anyway, it's a long climb up this pass, and we were climbing up the pass in our family station wagon. And when we rounded out to the top, there was a Volkswagen bus sitting in the middle of the highway and a very large, I want to say, washing machine size rock sitting next to it. And the van was very damaged. It was significantly caved in on the side. So, but there was already people standing around. It looked like everybody was okay. There were a lot of RVs stalled out there too. So my father kind of slowly made his way around the van. And when we got on the other side of the van, my dad looked up to this granite slab above the highway there, and he said, "What the expletive is that?" And we all looked up there. And when I looked up there, I could see this large, and to me it looked just like a gorilla. That was the first thought I had as a kid, a gorilla sitting with his back to us on this rock, rocking back and forth. And first impression we had was that this thing had done this, although nobody else seemed to be paying attention to him. So that was kind of my first experience with really jumping into, this world, and that there's other things out there other than squirrels and deer. I didn't think too much about it after that until I'd seen a couple TV programs on it, and I kind of started tying it together a few years later. And
how
realized,
far away was this thing when you saw it?
I want to say it was probably 50 or 60 feet, not very far up. When you get up to the top of Tioga Pass, you're virtually at the top, and it's kind of like a granite dome over the top of it. So he was up on the side of this dome, and there's lots of large granite rocks, boulders around and stuff like that. It's all granite up there. So he wasn't too far away. Just a like a normal distance for me to recognize. If it had been a person, it would have been easily recognizable also. You know, it was just probably 50 or 60 feet.
Yeah, that's awful. That's awfully close. So what kind of details can you give the audience as far as what you were looking at?
Well, like I said, to me, it looked like the back of a gorilla. And in hindsight, some of the things I remember is that it did have kind of a conical head, a roundish conical head. It was very big, very wide, shoulder to shoulder. And just, it was probably from the waist up is all I remember seeing because it was sitting on a rock. And that I noticed it was just really rocking back and forth in a exaggerated motion. And I thought that was interesting. Of course, I had no idea what that meant till later on, you know, or what that could have indicated. I went away from the experience thinking I'd seen a gorilla on top of a mountain. So
wow, that's crazy.
It is crazy. But, you know, it took me a few years because I was a kid. I was 10 years old, a few years to kind of start putting it together. And that was kind of my first real, realization that they were out there. We'd seen the TV programs that everybody's seen, you know. And then, like I said, a few years later, I kind of put it all together and I thought, wow, I think I saw a Bigfoot, you know. Funny thing is, nobody in the car spoke about it ever again. It was funny. I had a little sister.
That seems to be a pretty common theme, actually. It's kind of interesting that people go through those types of encounters and they just don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, you know, I have my little sister who's probably not old enough to even realize, you know, she was 6 years old, so she probably not really taking it in, but neither of my parents really spoke of it at all. We just rode down the other side of the mountain, and I was left with that vision, you know, to kind of figure out myself. So that was my first encounter.
Yeah, it was your first encounter. I was going to say, so fast forward, how long did it take to have your second encounter?
Well, that was in the early 70s. So my next encounter, which is my grand encounter, as I call it, was in 96. And my now wife and I were driving through Connixie National Forest. It's up in the North Panhandle of Idaho. It kind of starts about at the southern point of the Panhandle and goes up into about the middle. Beautiful forest, very remote, very rugged. And we were driving on a dirt road looking for a camping place. We never really liked to camp around other people, so we would look for the most remote places that we could. And if we could find places that didn't have bathrooms or water, back then there's a pretty good chance you were going to be alone. Not these days, because all the motorhomes have water and bathrooms and all that stuff. They can camp anywhere. But back then, you were going to be by yourself out there. So that's what we were looking for. We'd come over from Spokane, Washington. We lived in Spokane. And we were just driving through. It was the middle of the day. It was 12:30, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It was very warm. And we're going down this dirt road. And alongside this dirt road, it's kind of, you got to kind of imagine, it's little foothills. You're kind of in a little valley there. It's little foothills and a lot of swampy areas off to the side. So we come around this corner, and there are maybe 24 deer standing right in the center of the road. And so we stop for them. You know, we're like, wow, this is weird, you know. You don't get to see this often. Usually it's at a distance, and they're running from you. So we pulled up to them, and they weren't parting. They weren't moving. They weren't afraid of us. And so we thought, wow, this is really odd. Check this out. We're laughing, having a good time with it, you know. So we're driving this little Toyota Tercel. So we rolled down the windows, and my wife slowly started edging her way through them without injuring any of them. And they were so locked in to whatever they were doing that we could actually reach out and touch them. And they weren't moving. And I thought, wow, they really have tame deer here in North Idaho, you know. This is really interesting. So as we pushed our way through that pack, when we came out on the other side, about 30 to 40 yards down the road, standing facing about 2 o'clock from us, was a Bigfoot right in the middle of the road. And it was stunning. I think we were both stunned. And we looked at it. I'm not sure how long we looked at it. You know, it kind of went into this like dream warp all of a sudden. And it did a 180, stepped off the road, and was gone. And so we drove up to where it had stepped off the road, and we stopped. And I don't think either of us were getting the magnitude of this yet during this time. And we drove up to where it stepped off the road, and it was just gone. We could not find it anywhere in there. And it was just really strange. You know, it was just gone. We sat there for a few minutes trying to find him, but his coloration was perfect for the environment. He was kind of a dark brown, or not dark brown, light brown and gray. And for some reason, what stuck in my head is old man when I saw him. You know, he looked like an old man, but he was very large. I want to say he was at least 7 feet tall. I have no way of really telling how tall he was, but he was very large. And not just tall, just big everywhere. And a lot of hair. It almost like, you know, for lack of better terms, it looked almost like he was covered with dreadlocks from head to tail, or head to toe, you know. And so we sat there for a few minutes looking for him, and we moved on. And once again, nobody said anything until we were about 20 minutes down the road, and my wife says to me, "Is that what I think it was?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think so," you know. And it's funny, we drove up a couple more miles, and then we decided to leave. You know, we'd driven all that way to get to Conixu, and we just made a decision, turned around. We went over to the Ponderay River on the border and stayed the night. So, and that one is crystal clear to me. It's amazing. I actually think about it every day at some point. At some point every day since then, I've thought about that experience.
So how did what you saw during that encounter, how did it compare as far as what you were looking at description-wise to the first encounter that looked very gorilla-like?
Very different. Very different. Like I said, the other one would to me would be like, you know, you see these toy dark brown teddy bears? That's what the hair kind of looked like in this other one. But you could tell that it wasn't a bear. I mean, it had shoulders, its arms were sticking out. You know, it had very much the stature of a human being sitting up there, you know. But it did have, like, really brown, dark hair. I couldn't tell if it was hair or fur. It looked like hair. But it moved like a human. Its arms were kind of out like a human. A couple times it put its arms forward and elbows sticking out. But this one looked a lot different. It looked completely different. It was just like a really big old man. That's what stuck in my head. His face, the skin was very dark, though. It looked like a dark brown and a little more human-like. You know, it looked like his face looked pretty human, actually. Like I said, he was standing at 2:00 to us, so we could just see, you know, the side of his face, his eyes, his nose. You know, he had a flattened nose, but it looked kind of human. So it was very different between these two. And he had that long grayish hair. It was just, you know, long flowing hair all the way down over his feet. We got a really good look at him. And then when he stepped and turned, it was like one step off the side of the road. And it was very, like, not unlike a human would do, but he stepped a long ways. So he was on the right side of the road, on the east side of the road, and he turned around and stepped off in one step. So it was your average little, you know, forest road. Maybe two cars could pass each other, you know. So
I've always found it fascinating, these roadside encounters or these roadside crossings. I don't know what to make out of that behavior. If these things are what I think they are, and I think they're highly intelligent creatures, it doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever that it's almost like they wait for a car or a vehicle to start passing by for them to walk out in front of them. I don't know. I just don't know what to make out of that behavior. It fascinates me every time I hear a roadside crossing like that.
Yeah, this one, you know, kind of the feeling that we came to after talking about it later is we really feel like we possibly interrupted a hunt. You know, that's what it felt like. It looked like he had these deer at his sights. They knew they were in his sights. And the more time they spent around us, the less likely it was that they were going to be killed, you know. we don't know what happened to the deer as soon as we drove away. We don't know if they ran. I didn't pay any attention to him because we had this thing standing in front of us. But it looked like he was already on the road. And that's what it appeared to be when we pulled over, because he was over to the side of the road, the far side of the road. And we're driving a little Toyota Tercel that was the exact same color as the deer. I mean, it was a little tan Toyota Tercel, you know, and it could have easily fit behind that herd of deer. But he would have had to hear it coming, right? You know, you would think. So I don't know either.
I think your theory makes sense that if with the deer there, I've heard stories with hunters talking about, or people even driving by talking about these things chasing deer, and I think they get locked into food mode and they don't care where they're at. They're just in, I'm hunting, and if I cross a road in front of a Toyota Tercel, I'm okay with that as long as I get a deer.
I know that years ago I used to hunt a little bit, and I actually only harvested one deer, but when I shot that deer, everything else went black around me. You know, I knelt down and drew down on this deer, and there could have been a concert going on around me, and I would have noticed, you know, because you are focused. And I don't know that they're really that afraid of us. It doesn't seem like, you know, I feel like they know we're out there. We know they're out there. They try and stay away, you know. I think there's a lot of them. I think, you know, and I am just now coming out and telling these stories because I'm not very good at taking the other side of it, you know, the ridicule side of it. So I'm just now breaking out of that. But and I think people who spend any time in the woods have experiences. They're just not recognizing them. You know, they're out there. There's noises. There's things happening. And I think most people just go, oh, what was that? And then they let it go.
Right.
You know, I had this guy that I worked with, and this is one of my favorite little stories. It's not super significant, but favorite. I was trying to tell him, he was explaining to me this place he went fishing out by Lassen Mountain. And I was telling him, well, you know, hey, they've had a couple sightings along this road, which would have been the road he had taken to get into this Robbers Creek Gulch. And I was trying to tell him, hey, they've had a couple, you know, Sasquatch sightings out there. And he's like, oh, man, you guys and that stuff, you know, do you ever give up on it? And I was like, I don't. I know they exist. And he says, you know, and I got the same, you hear this story a lot. Wayne, I've spent, you know, my whole life in the woods, and I've never seen one. And I was like, I know. And he came down to telling me, he says, you know what, I believe you're, and I told him the story about the Conixie National Forest. And he says, you know what, I believe you, I just don't believe in Bigfoot. And it was 2 weeks later, I came to work, and we live in kind of a suburban rural area here. We're very surrounded by woods, and we live in a city, but just on the outside of that, there's rural communities, and it goes right up into mountains. So within just about any direction, you can be in mountains in 45 minutes. So he lived on the outskirts of Redding, over towards the Lassen side. And I came to work a couple weeks later, and he was waiting for me in the back hall that we all come in. He's like, I need to talk to you. And I was like, hey, what's up? And he says, well, he goes, me and my son and my son's friend were sitting on the deck last night. And he says, this god-awful yell scream came out of the woods on our property right there. He goes, I've never heard anything like this. He goes, the hair stood up on all of our arms. He goes, my son and his friend went inside and wouldn't come back outside. And I was like, well, you just had your first experience. He goes, I've heard cougars. It wasn't a cougar. He goes, I've heard everything out there. He goes, I've never heard anything like this. I said, well, there you go, you know. So now you've had that experience. Do you believe me now? And he's like, God, I don't know what to think, you know. So it was a little payback story. I enjoyed that one. He was the perfect guy. He was the perfect guy to have that experience for me, you know.
Exactly.
So I'm sure his mindset has changed a little bit, but I believe they're out there and people have experiences and they hear things and stuff, and they just don't, you know, if you hear a stick snap in the woods, you know, if you're not into the Bigfoot thing, that could be a deer, and it could be a deer, you know, or it could be a Bigfoot. And I just don't think people really look for the experience. I think you got to be open to and looking for the experience to have them most of the time.
I agree.
know?
And I know outside of your encounters, you've had several other experiences. Why don't you tell us about those?
I had the next experience I had, and we didn't see a Bigfoot on this one, but it was an interesting experience. We, like I said, in 40 minutes you can be in the mountains any direction here except south. We do what's bike camping. We have a couple trailers for our bicycles, and I'm talking pedal bicycles. And we'd load up the backpacking camping gear onto these bicycles, and we'd ride out to the mountains and camp. And it's usually a 1 or 2 nighter, nothing too extensive. There's only so much stuff you can carry. And so one of these days we went out to the Whiskeytown National Park, which is west of us. There's a lake out there, and there's also a creek that runs north out of the Trinities, the Willow Creek area we're talking about. And then it comes out at the bottom of Shasta Lake again, or Whiskeytown Lake again. So we went on that lower part, and there's a campground further up the road, but we took a Y in the road and took our bikes down the other side of the creek opposite of the campground and rode up probably, maybe a half a mile on the creek side. No road there. It's just all rocky shore. And we got all our stuff set up, got our sleeping bags set out, and got everything going, got the lantern lit. We got there just in the evening, and we ate dinner, cooked dinner and ate dinner. And it got pretty chilly, so we climbed in our sleeping bags and went to sleep. And then about 3 o'clock in the morning, I hear these huge rocks hitting the creek and just splashing us. We were about 30 feet from the creek edge where we slept, and they were splashing us. And so I jumped right up and looked around, got my flashlight, and the wife just covered her head up with her sleeping bag. And so I walked up and down the creek, and I didn't really see anything. And then as I was coming back, I heard something going up the hill. I couldn't tell. And this hill, when I say hill, it's more like a cliff. I heard something going up there, and I thought, well, only a deer can really climb that, you know? And once again, I wasn't thinking Sasquatch or Bigfoot at all. So that ended the night. I actually walked as far up as the campground to see, and everything was dark up there. Nobody was doing anything. So I was like, wow, that's odd. And I was starting to think Sasquatch. So I went back and we slept, got up the next morning, did all of our stuff, and left. Well, the other day I drove out there, and I wanted to go see the other side of that creek. So we took out there, and it was impossible to get back there. I had to go back there with a machete, and I was falling all over the place, and it was like there's no trail there. But I got to a spot where it was all matted down. There was a spot with grass on these rocks. They're growing down around the rocks, and it was all matted down. And I was looking around, and I was with my wife, and I was like, what do you think? I said, look at this hill. Look at this matted down. It was throwing these huge rocks in the creek. You know, I'm like, what else could it have been? And then she goes, be careful. Don't step in that poop over there. And so I look around, and I turn around, and here's this pile of, I want to say it's poop, but it's all like grasses and moss from the creek and a deer hoof. And so I took a picture of it. That's the one that I sent you. And so I put that out there for people to take a look at yesterday, you know, and it's interesting. I'm getting a lot of, why didn't you get it tested? But I'm just not in that frame of mind yet. I'm getting there, you know, but I was just happy enough with the experience, you know, to look down there and go, oh my God, what could do this? And I thought big cats could do that maybe. I doubt a bear would do it. You know, we have little black bears here, and we have a few cougars running around, but I just don't know what else could have that inside their stomach and then pass it. And then the next day, I read an article that said about 80% of a Bigfoot's bowel movement could be creek grasses, waterborne grasses, and other things. So I thought, well, that's just about what this was. It was a big pile of creek grasses and this deer hoof. So it was interesting to me. And I don't know if it all ties together completely, if it means that, but I still feel like it was a Bigfoot throwing the rocks at us in the water that night, because these were huge rocks and just making a big splash. Yeah. And when I got over there, I thought, nothing could really stand over here and throw something. I couldn't, you know, unless I had some kind of size and stability. you know. There's no way a human could have done it that I could see.
Right.
And I don't know why they would have, you know, so. And, you know, so that was interesting. And I think, you know, there's been a few experiences in Whiskeytown National Park. There's been a couple things that have happened there with Bigfoot yells and some tree knocks and stuff. And I think they're there. They have a ton of acreage from the Highway 299 goes to Trinity County, goes to the Trinity area, Willow Creek, that famed area. And south of 299 is Whiskeytown National Park, and then it goes all the way to the Mendocino Coast Mountains. And there's really nothing in between. So it's just this huge, vast area of wilderness out there. And, you know, there are some out there, I know. And, you know, it makes sense to me that they would come to the Whiskeytown Park to maybe feed in the creeks for accessibility, you know. So I felt like that was a Bigfoot experience, and I'll be looking out there some more. So there's a road that you can get on up above there. It's closed off right now, but we're going to go out probably next week and hike that and get up on top of that rock and look and see what we can find around there. And with the condition of the dirt here right now, we just got over a couple pretty good rainstorms. You know, there might be some evidence. So
yeah, you have to let me know what you find out there, man.
I will. I'll definitely keep you in the loop. And I have several trips planned already this year. I told you about the one in East Fork and Willow Creek, where there's purportedly a family of 4 living on the mountain above that campground. I want to go there and take a look again. And then the family, the mother and her 2 kids that were trapped in the restroom at the rest stop on the way to Lassen. I want to go check that out. I went and checked out another place the other day right here on the edge of town from 2016. I found a newspaper article of a family that was run out of their house and it's in actually a residential area right on the edge. In 2016, they had so much trouble with Sasquatches there. They were walking on the roof. They were tearing their yard apart. They tore their barbecues apart, tore their fences down. And they were coming up. They came up once, and as the story goes, they got some hollers and some yells, and then the next night they just came right into the backyard and tore everything up. And they put up with it for about a month, and they had to leave. So I want to go check that area out, see what it looks like. But that's a residential area, so it'd be interesting. They live right on the edge of the residential area with their back to, green space. So
yeah, that sounds fascinating, check that out, man. You have to let me know what you find out there for sure. I
will. And then we spent some time over, I don't know if you're familiar with the Smith River area, Crescent City on the coast, and Smith River, the Redwoods. Mm-hmm. A lot of experiences in the Smith River area. A lot of road sightings in the Smith River area. It's a very remote, beautiful place, and lots of deep canyons and stuff, very deep canyons. Kind of the funny little thing is I have my 4-year-old into this, and she's very much in the Squatch mode. As a matter of fact, we went out on the edge of town the other night and did some hollers. I got another place that I'm working, so we did our yells into this canyon. We didn't get anything. We didn't stick around long enough because she got afraid. It was really dark. But we were coming back from the Smith River, from Crescent City into the Smith River area one time, and there's a little drive you can take there, a little parking lot, and then you walk this quarter-mile trail down to where they have these flowers, and I forget the name of the flowers are escaping me, but they're very rare, and so they're only in little pockets in certain areas that have serpentine growing in the rocks. Somehow the serpentine supports these flowers, and they're like bug-eating. They're carnivorous flowers, and they're huge. So we walked back there. They're back there. And I knew I was right in the Smith River area, and this was it. They're here somewhere. So we walked back, and we're looking at the flowers, and the whole time we were back there, this crow was just going off. It was either a crow or a magpie or something up in the tree, just like annoyingly going off. And so we're looking around, and then I told my little one, I said, let's do a couple yells while we're here. We're in Smith River, And so I did a couple yells. The magpie's still going off. Did a couple more. Then the magpie shut up. And my granddaughter walked a few more feet, and she goes, I feel really creepy. And I was like, okay, let's go. you know. So I feel like they're, you know, they have those good senses still. They haven't been worn down by life, you know. So I really feel like there's probably one right there too. You know, the air did change around it. It did have a sense of like stillness all of a sudden. The bird did shut up, you know, and she sensed that. So I feel pretty strongly about stuff like that, you know, that they can, you know, I mean, I've never really had that feeling until then. That was the first time I've ever, you know, because my feeling followed her. I was like, oh, she's creeped out. Oh, I am too, you know, so.
I learned long ago, always trust your gut, man, because it's always going to be right.
Yeah. So we'll be going to that area, and I'm on a mission to prove to people in this area that they're around here, and they're closer than they think. So that'll be my focus. We have really nice weather now, so I'll probably get out a little bit here in the next couple of weeks, and then obviously more in the summer. It gets really, really hot here in the summer, so you can only go at night. But I also feel like both of the ones that I laid eyes on were in the middle of the day. So I think going out, to me, going out at night is limited. It limits you, you know, and your visibility and your sight and stuff. So I like going out in the daytime. And for the kids, it's less scary. You know, they want to go along until we're out there at night. And then they're like, oh, no, you know, what do we have ourselves into here, you know? So
well, definitely keep us posted, man, and be careful out there. These things are
will do.
These things are unpredictable, so definitely be careful and keep us up to date, and let us know what you find out there. And if you guys have had an encounter and you want to be on the show, send me an email. You can get me at brian@sasquatchodyssey.net. Wayne, thanks again, man. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. I appreciate you letting me tell my stories.